When Pac-Man hit arcades in 1980, it took the video game world and arcades by storm, as it was unlike anything anybody had ever seen before. It immediately turned into a mega success with its simplistic gameplay, yet addictive nature. A Pac-Man cabinet was always crowded in every arcade and was constantly being fed quarter after quarter by eager gamers. For the first time in video game history, a video game actually had a mascot, with Pac-Man being the face of the franchise and by far the most recognizable video game character at the time. And even to this day, Pac-Man is widely recognized and without a doubt paved the way for other video game icons like Mario and Sonic. Pac-Man was so popular in the early 80s, it spawned off multiple sequels, cartoon show, toys, board games, breakfast cereal, and even had its own hit single, Pac-Man Fever. Pac-Man was the first major craze in video gaming. And even to this day, Pac-Man, by some, is still considered the greatest video game of all time, and if it's not, it's at or near the top, as well as Pac-Man is a franchise mascot himself, as he would almost surely be found on the Mount Rushmore of gaming mascots. Its impact on the video game world is almost unprecedented. It established the maze chase game genre, was the first video game to make use of power-ups, and featured 4 ghosts that each have their own different artificial intelligence that reacts to players' actions. Pac-Man is also the first video game to feature cutscenes with the little skits that take place in between certain levels. So when word got out in 1982 that Atari had acquired the Pac-Man license, was working on a home console port of the game, it unsurprisingly lit the video game world on fire, as fans were overly excited about being able to play Pac-Man in their own homes. Naturally expecting high sales, Atari produced over 1 million copies of the game and held a National Pac-Man Day on April 3rd, 1982 to promote its release. At the time, the game was a commercial success, and still to this day remains the best-selling Atari 2600 game of all time, and was the best-selling video game of all time, period, for several years. Despite its commercial success, Pac-Man was not received well by critics and a lot of fans, which begs the question, what's the deal with Pac-Man on the Atari 2600? Pop the game in, turn the system on, and the first thing you're treated to is a game that looks nothing like the arcade version of Pac-Man. The color palettes are all different. The maze isn't even close to what it looks like in the arcade. The dots that Pac-Man eats has become dashed lines. The power pellets in each corner has turned into little squares, and even the fruit in the middle has been replaced by a cube of some kind. To make matters worse, Pac-Man himself looks nothing like he did in the arcade, and the ghosts are just a flickering pixelated mess. And although at the time many fans were okay with their home version of Pac-Man, a large portion of fans were not, which ultimately led to many copies being returned to video game stores and put Pac-Man among the lead culprits of the video game crash of 1983, with tens of thousands of Pac-Man cartridges buried out in New Mexico along with other games like E.T. and Centipede. So what exactly went wrong with the Atari 2600 port of Pac-Man? Because a few years later, when Ms. Pac-Man and Pac-Man Jr. were released for the Atari 2600, those ports were far closer to their arcade counterparts, and unlike other Atari failures like E.T., which was given only 5 weeks to complete, Pac-Man was given 6 months to be ported over to their system. Lead programmer Todd Fry claims he spent 80-hour work weeks for 6 straight months working on the game. But the main problem was that Todd Fry was not provided with any arcade design specifications to work from, and had to figure out how to design the game just by playing the arcade version. And another problem was that Atari played it extremely cheap in developing the game, using their standard 4 kilobyte ROM cartridge, which was chosen for its lower manufacturing costs, rather than using the 8 kilobyte cartridges that had just became available. If you look at some of the other arcade ports on the Atari 2600, games like Space Invaders, Frogger, Breakout, they all ported fairly well to the 2600, even considering the limitation of the hardware. So Pac-Man, naturally, by looking at it in its simplistic design, you would think should be a fairly easy port to make. And to deal with the limitations of having to work with only a 4 kilobyte ROM cartridge, Todd Fry was dealt an unwinnable hand, and again, by not being provided any arcade specs to work with, his hands were pretty much tied on the project. As stated earlier, one of the major complaints, the horrendous flickering of the 4 ghosts. Since Atari couldn't use 5 moving sprites on screen at the same time, the flickering takes place because each ghost only appears once out of every 4 frames, and because of the flickering, almost makes each ghost's color impossible to tell apart from the others. Fry had plans in the works for a flicker management system to try to get rid of that, but ended up scrapping the idea because Atari didn't care about the issue, was fixated on getting the game released as fast as possible.
I looked at the Pac-Man and I said, what are the essential features of this? You got the little Pac-Man, you got the little ghosts, you got the little dots, and you got the little maze, so I'll make a maze with the little dots and little ghosts and a little man. And then I'll do something with them very similar to what Pac-Man does. And I did.
But he willingly took on the Pac-Man task and said that he would deliver the product for them. And he did it in 2K. Now he went to them several times and said, look, if you would give me more memory, I could write a different kernel. A kernel was the fundamental element of the video driver that drove the screen. And Todd said that he could write a better kernel where the ghosts would not flicker, but management was adamant. It was going to be a 2K cartridge or nothing at all. So he went back and he made it in 2K, which was possible, but this was poorly received by the public.
And also, according to Fry, the reason that the maze has a blue background instead of the arcade-accurate black was that Atari's official home product policy states that only space-type games should feature black backgrounds. Despite all this, Pac-Man originally was a commercial success, selling more than 1 million cartridges in less than a month, and in 1982 alone sold over 7.2 million cartridges. Pac-Man also helped drive up console sales for Atari, which was part of the plan from the beginning, and Atari had sold over 12 million units by 1982. And once cartridges got in the hands of the public and the critics, it immediately started getting negative reviews for how different it was to the arcade version, and how poor of a port it was visually and in its gameplay. And in 1982, Electronics Games magazine published its first ever bad review for an Atari video game, claiming it to be a massive letdown considering all the anticipation for the game and the time that Atari had to design it. But Fry, in the end, did not express regret over his part in the Pac-Man port, as he felt he made all the best decisions he could under the circumstances at the time, and was paid a 10-cent royalty for each copy sold. But he also stated that he would have absolutely have done things differently had he been able to use a larger capacity ROM cartridge. Let me know in the comments, did you own Pac-Man for the Atari 2600 back in 1982? What were your original thoughts the first time you put the game in? Were you shocked and disappointed at the poor quality in comparison to the arcade version? Or were you just happy to be able to play Pac-Man at home? And whether you love it or you hate it, considering that the game is still being talked about to this day, gives it a place in video game history. You almost can't talk about how great and impactful the arcade version was without bringing up the terrible 2600 port. And I find it ironic that Pac-Man helped build the video game industry up in the early 80s by the mega successful arcade version and played a huge part in almost killing it with the poor port given to Atari. Be sure to leave a comment below and let me know what you think of the arcade version and the 2600 port. Thanks everybody for watching, and we will see you next time.